Hello and welcome to my woolly PhD. I'm Liz Scuff and this is a weekly vlog about what I am currently learning and making in my anthropology PhD all about wool here in Iceland. And I decided the theme of my week has been life and death. So what better week to think together about biopolitics or biopower. So before we tuck into it though, I did want to share a little peak moment from this week, maybe from my whole life, that's a little bit related to the topic. So it's lambing season is starting here in Iceland. It starts a little bit different for different farmers, but around about now, depending on the farm. And so I think here it started about a week or so ago. Someone started very early. Sort of a high achieving sheep in Iceland. They're like having 3 and 4 babies at a time. Sometimes twins is the standard. Anyway, very exciting. So I have been making friends with the ewes in the maternity, according to the maternity ward. So it's a special area that's been sort of set up for lambing. It's not there all through the year. But these past few weeks, I sometimes go and I sit in the pen and I let the sheep come and say hello if they're inclined. And some are really keen and quite bold. Others are curious or a bit cautious. They take a bit longer. And some are just completely disinterested. I think that's all really fascinating, right? But I do it because I want to learn about sheepiness, or being a sheep, like how to distinguish their faces, how they interact, how they move, their gestures, their sounds, their smells. And I also want them to become more familiar with me and therefore less stressed by me, right? These are pretty calm sheep because these are very calm farmers who prioritise sort of animal welfare in their handling practices. But sheep also, they remember faces and they know different people. So I kind of figure it's good to become a familiar face that's associated with snacks and calm behaviour. Anyway, so I had sat down in the pen. I'd been in there a little while, sat down in one spot and then I moved somewhere else and I had sat down and just to be face level with them too. And several of them came right up to my face and they were like sniffing at my mouth. And I know that sheep, many animals, they don't just get to know something by smelling. They will also, because they do this with my fingers, right? They'll kind of mouth it, some kind of put it between their teeth and they don't have teeth on the top, right? But their teeth and their sort of top gum and just kind of feel with their teeth. Anyway, so I knew that if they were coming this close and they were smelling, there was likely to be a bit more action. And I'm not stupid when it comes to having animals lick my mouth. So it came right up and they're kind of sniffing. So I turned my face to the side a little bit and they were like sniffing and then gently kind of mouthing and licking the side of my face, up my hairline. One of them even just got my ear. I don't know, if you've never interacted with little sheep noses, they're the softest little muzzles, they're so gorgeous. Anyway, it was just so incredibly delightful. The warmth of their breath and the sound of the sniffing, especially when it's like right in my ear. It was the little licks. I highly recommend it if you ever have the chance. It was lovely. I'm going to be talking about this for years. Remember that time? Anyway, biopower is a bit of a rough change of gears, but biopower is a concept developed by Michel Foucault, who's really quite an extraordinary French philosopher and historian of the 20th century. And he thought and wrote quite widely, but his work had a focus on power and authority in social institutions. And biopower, or biopolitics as it's kind of used interchangeably somewhat, looks at the intersection of sort of the nation state and the body and how states control bodies, deciding who gets to live and die. I mean, war is a particular example, right? Some bodies are killable, other bodies are not. And then also while you're alive, what kind of medical interventions are available? What are your health options? What exposures to risk? including the commercial determinants of health, right? So this is fast food advertising is a commercial determinant of health, and so how this political landscape of fast food advertising, regulations on sugar and hyper-processed foods, all these things, right? Also the legal structures that force interventions on the body, like psychiatric drugs or involuntary psych hospitalizations. Also legal structures about end of life, the right to suicide, I think abortion debates. These are all kind of quite common contexts in which something like biopower is very relevant. It's basically about having power over bodies. And COVID was another, like, an incredible context in which to observe and think about biopower, the way in which people's movements were restricted, the way we'd have to check in. Certainly in Melbourne, we had a massive amount of lockdowns. The narratives and debates around vaccinations, and anyway, that's another great context. Now, I'm of course particularly interested in the concept of biopower on the farm in relation to agricultural animals, particularly sheep. Now, Foucault didn't really explore the concept in relation to animals, but scholars in animal studies and critical animal theory have used the concept quite a bit. So thinking about sheep farms as biopolitical apparatus gives rise to many sort of sites of or aspects that we could explore using the framework. So we can look at how sheep bodies and sheep memes, and I don't mean sheep memes on social media, although they're pretty cute, but it's symbols and images and representations of sheep, right? So not the actual sheep, but the representations of them. How representations and the bodies sort of intersect as mutually reinforcing forms of value, but also how this value exists, I'd say partly, but possibly significantly, because what is hidden and not seen. So multiple times this week I've encountered situations or scenes in farming life that should not be seen by the outside gaze. These are things that farmers don't talk about, and certainly don't post on social media, partly because the general public would be outraged, not necessarily because farmers are doing anything wrong or cruel, but because it breaks an unspoken social contract between farmers and the public, which is like, basically, don't show me the gross stuff, don't show me the death, don't show me the illness, so I don't have to grapple with the complex and confusing moral territory of agricultural food production, right? So, and also, of course, because many cultures, certainly I'd say Western culture, has become so distanced from death. Death has become characterized as something not normal. It's somehow outside of normal life. And so it makes me think of this Instagram channel, Farm Life Iceland. I love it. But how they're only showing things that are really cute lambs, really cute sheep, really cute toddlers interacting with really cute sheep, and it's all kind of fun. And but you're not seeing, stillborn lambs or sheep that have to be put down because of illness, or sheep who've gotten sick and who are struggling to recover, and all these kinds of things that you don't. Yeah, it's very sanitized, right? We only want to see the farm as a sanitized site, not in its wholeness, right? So farmers have learned to manage that. Anyway, so that's one thing that thinking about biopower on a sheep farm would lead to. Another thing we could consider is also genetics and breeding selections. So in some flocks, right, you live or die based on the quality of the wool you grow. And this quality is judged by humans based on markets, which in turn have complex histories and political entanglements. So here, one concern I've heard is how the Icelandic sheep is changing over time due to breeding selections that optimise for meat. The shape of the animal's body has changed, and because of the preference for white wool in the milling, the big mill particularly, the colour diversity is decreasing, and so the breed is getting homogenised actually. This is a concern for some people. I don't know if it's a concern for everybody here. this is another kind of, this is biopolitics, right? Because biopower focuses on populations more than individuals, so we have like farmers and vets and agricultural scientists are managing flocks as statistical aggregates, right? They're tracking fertility rates and lambing percentages and weight gain curves and fleece yields and mortality rates. So the individual sheep kind of matters primarily as a data point within the population. And if you watched episode 39, called A Ram Catalogue Through the Anthropological Lens, where we met Frosty, who is marvellously fleshy, we saw an example of population management where sheep is described as data points. And remember, if you saw it, right, I mentioned that there is almost no mention of temperament in the ram descriptions, so no mention really of personhood, just of kind of productivity. They are described in terms of capital and value. So decisions about breeding and life and death are made based on this sort of calculative logic, which also shapes the sort of human-animal relationships on the ground, right? Another angle is how sheep breeds are biopolitical categories. So in Iceland, there is an incredibly strong narrative about the genetic purity of the Icelandic breed, that it has been uninterrupted since settlement in the 800s, no new sheep introduced since then. I'd say this narrative, as I said, it's in Iceland. I think it's in stories told about Iceland and an Icelandic sheep. Maybe some people here repeat it, because it's not true. But it is if you're looking online, it's very hard to find that information. I remember when I was doing my desk research before I came, I eventually found it in a German agricultural science journal from, well, I don't know where it was. Anyway, it was really, but that there had been some new sheep brought in. Generally, they'd bring diseases, so they'd be slaughtered, and any other animals. So there's not a big impact on the genetic line, but some, right? So anyway, but on the ground, it's also easy to find that. The farmers have told me about it. Said, oh yeah, that's right. And they brought that ram in, and it brought Scrapey in, and so it's a thing. The national identity of the Icelandic human is very tied up with the defining of the Icelandic sheep as unique to this place, an unadulterated breed that's been preserved for nearly 1,200 years. It's this cultural symbol of identity, perseverance, I say independence as well. Anyway, I've got to think more on that. It means a lot of things. Another one is sort of Foucault's sort of famous formulation of biopower of making live and letting die. Right? It's also relevant. So farmers are actively intervening to sustain life. So there's vaccinations, supplementary feeding, the selection of grazing areas, assisting lambing, parasite control, while also deciding which animals are killed and when, what for. So this sort of making live and letting die. Another one is thinking about sheep bodies as sites of optimization. Oh, gee, wow. I'm just having a moment of like boom in my head about something completely related and unrelated. Back on track. So sheep bodies are subject to intense technological or technical intervention, right? Depends on the country, the farm, so it's not all the same. But there's, drenching and dipping and docking and shearing. And if you're in Australia, sometimes there's mulesing, which is cruel, stop doing it. Scanning for multiple fetuses using ultrasounds, also using ultrasounds to assess meat and fat development, hormone treatments to synchronise ovulation, and definitely not all of these are practised in Iceland or practised widely. Some are just completely unnecessary. But each of these interventions is a biopolitical act, right? So reshaping the biological capacities of the animal to align with productivity goals or imperatives. And then if we tried to do a biopower kind of more than human, post-human mashup, we might also be thinking about how sheep act and resist and shape their biopolitical contexts. So sheep behaviour will have shaped population management practices, right? They aren't simply passive machines to be managed. So my earlier story about spending time with the sheep so they get to know me is like a micro example of this, right? So farm animals who are less stressed do better and are easier to manage. And so therefore they are influencing farming practices themselves, and the biopolitical context that they're kind of living in, or living and dying in. Sheep farming and land governance is like another, they're sort of inseparable in pretty much every country, but definitely in Iceland, right? So in particular grazing rights in the highlands, where communal land that has been used for sheep grazing in summer since forever in Iceland, as long as Iceland's had people and sheep, I think. I'm not sure when it started, but probably very early since settlement. So these grazing rights in the highlands, concepts of public and private ownership of land, land use conflicts between farmers and power companies and environmentalists, etc. So we can look at how the bodies of sheep and the bodies of landscapes are kind of co-managed through interlocking biopolitical institutions, right? Agricultural policy, conservation schemes, veterinary surveillance, market systems, all intersecting and influencing and determining this kind of land governance practices and social identity too, of course. It reminds me, there's one of the kind of cultural narratives of the Icelandic identity, I think, is something about wildness, and something that is really, I see really prized in the horses and the sheep, and for sheep, that the highland grazing is a really important part of that, right? They're off on their own. No one's there monitoring or whatever. They just get taken there and they head off for a couple of months. And I think, the way that they kind of live with horses here too is something that where the wildness of the horse is also really valued and honoured. Anyway, lastly, this is by no means a comprehensive list, but thinking about wool in particular, right, we can trace how the biopolitical management of sheep bodies produces both a raw commodity and a cultural object loaded with meaning, and how these two sort of dimensions are in like a productive tension. So like merino and Shetland wool and Icelandic wool are sort of good examples of wool fibres that carry enormous symbolic capital, tied to notions of craft and heritage and locality and naturalness. And then like also the global domination of merino. This is kind of tied to colonialism and war, and also, the market demand for soft. And so, the human body's desire for soft fabrics is also kind of associated with wealth and class as well too, right? To be able to afford fine, soft knitted things and to have a lifestyle where they are practical, it's a class thing. Anyway, fascinating. Biopolitics, biopower, super interesting. I also have come across Foucault a bit in sort of mental health area too. He wrote a lot about that, and it's quite interesting. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about, because there's been a bit of life and death going on here. Having babies is a risky business for most species, I think. Anyway, what have I been making? Not a lot. Not a lot of knitting time, and my, what's it called? Swatching. My swatching thing is obviously going on for longer than the 2 weeks I thought it would. It's also like not a very transportable, it's not easy to pick up and down because it's a bit complicated, because I'm trying to swatch 2 different patterns and 2 different colour combinations, so 4 different things in one swatch. I think it was a dumb idea actually, but I'm going to persist and just check. yeah, and so it's just not very transportable. So what I have, I've been working on these socks. It's not very exciting, but I started these when I was here last time and took them back to Melbourne with me, and then I brought them back again. And so I'm doing heel down, and it's little stripy things. I don't remember what that heel's called. Anyway, one of those. I'm just sort of turned, and I'm still working on the gusset decreases. This yarn is called the Vergasokkar, and it's from the Uppspunni mill, and 100% Icelandic wool, and it's specifically made from, because they assess every single fleece that comes in, what will this be good for? What kind of yarn would this be good for? And because they make 1, 2, 3, essentially 4, well, no, 3, one of them's not, anyway, what I tend to think of as 3 main kinds of yarn, like a sock yarn, a fine lamb's wool yarn, and then, well, 4. Anyway, whatever. This is the sock yarn, so it's 3-plied, made from, they select the fleeces where they go, this is a really strong fleece, this is good for socks. High twist, so they're extra strong without the need for nylon. So I'm really looking forward to getting to wear these, because I have not worn socks made from this wool yet. So we'll get there, get it done. I am wearing my lovely Asina, whatever it is, cardigan. Loving this so much. From Anna Sjosvad. I'm very happy with this, and I'm still button hunting, though I have looked at three different sort of collections of buttons. Haven't found what I want. I think I actually know what I want, I just haven't seen them around. So yeah. Oh, that's what I also wanted to do in this video. Hang on, I forgot. I wanted to show you how to twist a skein of wool. So there's a story, right? So I'm sure you all know what a skein is, but just in case, sometimes people come across this channel and this somehow YouTube suggests it to them. They don't knit, and they end up watching and go, hey, I don't know why YouTube suggested this to me. I don't even knit, but oh, that was interesting. So anyway, that was a skein, not a ball, not a cake. So I was taught how to twist skeins at the mill when I was here last, and honestly, I thought it would be easier. I just kind of would look at them and just go, you know, I get you just kind of twisted, and it can't be that much to it. And I was kind of surprised that as a fairly avid knitter that I hadn't actually had much cause to do this in my life already. And it wasn't as simple as I thought it would be. And my first efforts were pretty scrappy, I have to say. It took me probably, an hour or so of doing them to really get it. And it's such a great task in which to kind of study movement with wool, touch with wool, the interaction between skin and hands and wool, and musculature. Like if you do it for long enough, of course, you're going to get some sore fingers, and so building finger strength for the task. The temperature depends on how easy it is. If it's a bit warm, actually, if you're repeatedly doing it, your fingers get sticky and this becomes a problem. So all these, it's a great little activity in which to study so many different somatic experiences. So that's partly why I also thought to share it, but also different people do it differently, and different people at the mill taught me different things about how to do it, or the different ways in which they did it. Now I have also kind of developed a few of my own things. Now there's also thinking about what kind of skein do you want? Do you want one that's soft and floppy and squishy, or do you want one that's a bit firmer, that's durable on the shelf? Because in a store, people are coming along and squeezing and grabbing, and you want them to get a sense of the squish, but also you want them durable on the shelf so they're not completely falling apart all the time with all the handling. So anyway, let's do it. Yeah. So you got your skein, and you could do whatever fingers you want. I think I probably just stick them between these two fingers, right? And this isn't going to come up very neat. Well, this is the other thing, right? If you've got like loose strings, well, first you've got to kind of just make sure you've actually got your loop right, and you haven't got some strings crossing over, strands. And then, so then I would get it between two fingers, and also where you want your loose ends to end up. If you put them right at these ends, they're going to poke at the top. If you put them in the middle, they're going to poke out at the bottom. If you're putting a yarn label on this, you want it at the 1/4 and the 3/4 mark so that it will be hidden by the label, because you don't want to, it saves you having to tuck your ends in to make it look neat. Now, I have seen skeins in market stalls that have got loose things on them. They're not that appealing to the buyer, I have to say. Tucking your ends in matters if you're selling. So anyway, then it's just twisting around, right? So this is why I thought it would be super easy, because what's hard about that? I mean, if you're able, you know, if you've got sort of full movement and enough strength in your hands, of course. Sometimes we don't. Now, somebody had told me 7 or 8 times, and so for ages I was counting. Now I don't have to count so much because I can feel when I think it's tense enough. The other thing I've noticed or learnt from doing this is that different spins, different yarns will twist differently, even if they're technically the same weight. So the stretchiness or something about them is different. And so I'll think, this needs more twist to look good. This one needs less. So I tend to be going to about 9. And then you're doing this, this one's behaving particularly well, that's nice. And you can give it a little tug. This one's come up really well. I think I went 9 twists there, maybe because it's already been in a skein. They often don't just kind of tuck together really easily like that. And if they don't, you can kind of pull down through here. But the little trick that I do also is right at the end, I'll do an extra twist at this end and this end to do the tuck. Goes in there, poke it through. Obviously, I'm not someone who does instructional videos very often. Anyway, you can tuck your little ends in, but that makes the little knot on the top quite snug and makes it tidy. And when you don't do it, you get like a lot of these strands kind of hanging down a bit. And so I think that's the little thing that nobody told me to do that. I worked it out myself and I was pretty pleased about that. This is such a small thing. But anyway, you could even go a little bit tighter on this, but I think it then starts making it too tight. Because the other thing is that it's hard to distribute the twist evenly through the whole skein. This end will be a bit looser, and up the top here will be a bit tighter. And that's where kind of doing this thing can help you sort of distribute it down. Now, why does this even matter? Well, one of the things that working in the mill, this is what we do in anthropology, right? We kind of live in people's lives. And sometimes we're just spending a lot of time doing exactly what people do, which is not always super interesting in and of itself. But anthropology can make anything interesting. So one thing that I have been contemplating a lot working in the mill is twist. And the role of twist in lives, and how almost all fabrics are predicated on twist. Right? It doesn't matter what I don't know about sort of the more polyester plastic things actually. I don't know how they're made. Maybe there's a lot of twist going on there, but definitely spinning cotton, spinning hemp, spinning wool, all these, they're spun, right? They are basically twisted. And then they're twisted this way. And then if they're more than one ply, they're then twisted back the other way, wrapping around another piece. And then we twist them again to make them like this, or we wind them, which is different to twisting, to make balls. But so much of the world is working on twist, which I just think is very interesting, literally and metaphorically. There's something else that was making me think about. I've lost it. Must be a topic for another video. Anyway, that is my tip on how hand wind twist your skeins, and I have got, I reckon, I've clocked at least 500 of these, so I feel qualified to do the tutorial. There might even be more. Oh, it could be more. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, it's quite an enjoyable activity. I find it. Oh, that's the other thing I was thinking about. It's also, you know, like I get, initially I would get sore fingers from doing it, and also it has an impact on cuticles as well. So there's all these little fine details when we're in contact with a textile, the way it shapes our bodies. And there was one time, last time I was here, I got like an inflammatory kind of thing from a repetitive activity, doing some chicken processing. But then before coming this time, I went 10-pin bowling, which I don't do. It was a pretty spontaneous kind of thing, but I actually ended up with an inflammatory kind of injury in my knuckle here, which it's still there. I reckon that's 4 weeks later, a little bit, right? But it impacts on how I do these. Like to start with, because sometimes I would have 2 fingers through the thing, because then it would be kind of easier to do the slotting at the end. Anyway, so lots of ways in which our awareness and our attention to the body happens through our wool work as well. This is related to biopolitics. I'm sure you could connect it. Probably. Okay, it's enough. I'm starting to ramble. Thanks for watching. And yeah, if you've got any thoughts about this biopower business connected to wool and sheep, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. See you next week.